Hello again. I want to go back to the process where I left it in the previous video. Um, in the early stages of dialogue with the South Tyneside social services and legal professionals as well, or correspondence that I could see from them, bearing in mind that they have their own sort of rule of law, if you like, where they won't communicate directly with people. So, for instance, I was heavily criticised because I sent a direct email to Paul Mahan of South Tyneside because they kept repeatedly spelling younger daughter's name wrong. A basic courtesy. This is nonsense. There is no basis in law at all. It's designed to elevate the status of this profession and try to make them inaccessible. So it's the rule of lawyers. It isn't the rule of law. What struck me about this terrible and evil process, in my opinion, were two things. One, it was working to a reverse engineered conclusion straight away. So straight away, they take a cursory glance at the age of the children and they know what they want to do, which is this long-term care order and feeding them into the system and increasingly now private equity owned agencies. Actually, Sky News are starting to pick this up. They picked up on a Ofsted report about concern and profit motive in accommodation providers for children. It's becoming quite real, and I'm pretty sure rape gangs um, inquiries, if they're done properly, will see the presence of this dreadful for-profit business model that's leading to bad people um, being subject to bad incentives and the destruction of families over the repair of families. It's immoral. So there was this reverse engineered conclusion. I started making reference to this very, very early on. I could tell by the language they were using and the way they were behaving. Been trained to pick up on these things for a long time, and I could see it. The other thing was the whole thing was an elaborate process to make that look legitimate, effectively. So in essence, what they were doing is you've got this process. They want to make it look like a legitimate process. So they bring in independents that aren't really independent. They bring in, yeah, there's all sorts of it's quite, as the process goes on, more and more people come in. And they're all feverishly feasting on the third estate. It's quite disgusting to watch the money that was being gorged for what was a very, very unpleasant reverse engineered process. The other aspect is you could see immediately this emotional sterilization. They were onto it quickly, straight away, creating false narratives. Your parents are going to abduct you from school. Your parents are bad. Your parents are this. They were fiercely hostile to any signs of emotion from parents to children. Um, Showing photographs, children have been coached to believe that parents showing them historic photographs was manipulation. Imagine that. Saying things like, "We miss you, we wish you could come home," was stamped on immediately. They were immediately attacking the emotional bond between the child and us, younger daughter and us. That's why the Polish heritage was such a problem for them. That is why they were so keen to weaken that. Remember, she was taken away 3 weeks, didn't see her, and then made to sign an oppressive document with Laura Skelton put her name to, as banning Polish language when it had been denied from her for 3 weeks. Yeah, why would you do that if my understanding was incorrect? Incidentally, that's how the system works. The legal professionals are really the ones that are concocting this evil. And it's like a system of Russian dolls. So effectively, they get the social workers to do the bad things. and they hide in the background because that document the skeleton put a name to came out of their legal department. So they were setting her up essentially, and it's immoral in that respect as well. So you've got these things, and they start creating false narratives to fit this objective. It's very, very similar to what you would have seen from this Labour government. And I don't follow political parties, but you can see the same from it's the same playbook. Two budgets, two faux narratives around deficits. Those faux narratives are because they wanted to do certain things, like put taxes up, and in the instance of the last budget, put taxes up and funnel more money into welfare. So you create the faux narrative to justify your action. So you know what your action is, what you want, you create the faux narrative, and then go on like that. Incidentally, I saw the same thing with the FCA later on. So let's go back to this witness statement thing. So opening dialogue with them, say we see you as a key witness, we need a witness, like a witness statement, so on. But if I were to have consented to this witness statement, and you'll understand why I didn't, and I've explained it actually on the other channel that they locked me out of currently by the theft of my devices. They they would have crafted it, so there would be this compelled interview. They would craft it, and they would ask you then to approve it. So similar to like this, I guess. Well, the worst case situation, which has led to the seizure of my devices, is pointing out that in our case in the family court, that there was a statement that wasn't even signed, and the key witness said she didn't even see. So that's an extreme example. But what the FCA wanted to do in the Welltech case, but I could see the same dynamics. They wanted to draft a witness statement and ultimately me to approve it, sign or whatever. But the witness statement would be completely on the basis that the FCA's role prior towards April 2023 couldn't be discussed. So they wanted to completely control the narrative. And there's no way you can do that credibly. I said, look, I'm not going to get involved in a situation where you want to control a narrative and effectively massage out all the catastrophic errors that you made so you can use time and obfuscation to escape accountability at the expense of the victims of the scandal. And it was the same situation. And you saw it in the emails I published on the other channel, where the time zero approach, and I covered it in Lost the Races. We won't discuss our role prior to this. Well, I'm sure you don't want to do that. So how can you have confidence in the integrity of a system where somebody is trying to manipulate the narrative to achieve an objective? So their objective is to try to get a prosecution, which is not a bad objective at all, of course. But you're doing it in a way where you're completely distorting the reality that actually needs someone to understand that the allegations couldn't have occurred unless there were catastrophic errors and weakness in the system. So you see this all the time, and it's extremely it's all the same pattern. In essence, it's the manipulation and the distortion of narrative to achieve objectives, and that's exactly what this family court process was about. Slicing all the emotion out, sterilizing the child emotionally. It's extreme psychological abuse, crimes against humanity, to the extent of even destroying her heritage to turn her into a cash generative asset to effectively trade. And this we believe is prevalent throughout the system. it's immoral. So to give you a little bit of context, that Christmas, that first Christmas, after we protested about that obscene crime against humanity and banning Polish language use, so not even allowing a mother to greet a daughter in Polish 3 weeks after she was taken. Bearing in mind any supervised telephone conversations, the same applied prior to that, and I think there were a couple of them. So they did allow um, a I think another couple of visits around the festive period. We were allowed to exchange presents and one, and I think they did hastily and very reluctantly bring in Polish interpreters. Throughout this process, I'll tell you, they treated them, some of the Polish interpreters with appalling hostility, and they treated them with contempt. So much so that I actually felt the need as a someone British to apologise to them and say I'm sorry for how you were treated. I was embarrassed that people were being treated like this way, let alone what they were doing to my younger daughter and the way they were treating and bullying my wife as well. Christmas Day, we we were allowed. I'm not even sure we spoke to her on Christmas Day, or if we did, or certainly around. There was one call. It was so limited. I allowed my wife to take the call. Um, yeah, Polish band, of course. And my wife said you could even hear the breath of the foster carer. Um, can you imagine the humiliation and the stress that must have been on our younger daughter? Incidentally, that's the only calls we've since the time had on Christmas. They ban them now. You're not even allowed them. You're allowed one meeting in the week to Christmas. Not an extra meeting. They use it as your monthly meeting. So they don't give you an extra one. You're like 2 hours, and they structure them in a way where there's no quality. You can't sit down and have any quality. They'll say you've got to do an activity first, then a meal. So you imagine if you've got a 10 o'clock till 12 o'clock meeting time, which is what we've got this year, and they want to go bowling and have a meal. So how do you do that between 10 and 12 when most people you get the tail end of breakfast, or you won't even, probably the very start of lunch, in which case you'd have to eat it breathtakingly cooked. That's the inhumanity of this process. They won't even say, okay, we'll give you a little bit of extra time so you can exchange Christmas presents and so on and so forth. That's the immorality. One Christmas we were so rushed we had to exchange presents on the floor of a shopping centre. Uh, and they think that's perfectly fine and it doesn't do any damage to a child or humiliate a child. It's immoral. So let's say we now roll into the first. So they, I'll explain to you on. They've got this interim care order. You roll into the main um, case management hearings in January 2022. That's the first time we saw Hudson. Hudson had been made. We made sure she was aware of these issues. But I thought it was. She became very very hostile when she knew that I could see the corruption. Well, I felt the corruption in the system was in what I've just explained as the case went through. So we saw Hudson. It's very strange. They were all very frightened of her. They were, oh, this is Rachel Hudson, not Judge Hudson. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and I explained as it goes on. You've got this system where they'd almost created a fiefdom. It's your classic shop window. So in essence, got to do it all discreetly. You've got to do this, protect the child, and so on and so forth. Yes, that's your shop window, and you would agree. Child needs to be protected. They have to, give the child to a reasonable extent benefit of the doubt, and so on. But when you get behind it, you see the bad machinations. Same as I said, the shop window approach, online terror, the online safety bill, terrorist legislation, Same with digital ID. Now there's facial recognition expansion. It's all shop windowed. This bring down fences, do this, do this. Protect us against terrorism. All these things are good, but then the real nasty abuse, the theft of liberty, if you like, the taking of a liberty is in the background. And the family court system works the same, fronted up to protect children at first, this, that, the other, but the bad stuff is going on in the shop, not the shop window, and it's the same. And have a think about these liberty aspects. Going back to them, is if you isn't it strange that these acts and these new initiatives never appear in anyone's manifestos? So anything that involves reduction of your liberty never really appears in anyone's manifesto. So there is really never any consent for it, even though the loss of liberty that's coming in is massive. And I feel that we will get to a stage as a society where we will weep and say, you know, we gave up our liberty so meekly, and we'll cry. Um, and it's very hard to get it back when it's been taken. It's something to bear in mind. So, of this liberty, this hearing, so she comes along, she sets a basically a timetable out for when she wants the final hearing, which would be in June, early June of that year, 2022. Um, But one thing was very, very obvious is we prepared statements over the Christmas period. Effectively, my wife, her solicitor done. I'd largely done mine. My with this Westgarth, who I was working with, was so vacuous and no guidance and anything. Kept saying, "Oh, final hearing, final hearing." The final hearing is nonsense. Don't bring up these issues. That is nonsense, because that's what they want you to do, because they've got this emotional destruction going on. So they don't want you to challenge because they've got a 6 month window to sterilize the child emotionally. It's all a massive con. Don't believe that. So I effectively prepared mine, because she was just had no analytical capability or willingness. And so you get this first hearing. Again, it's musical chairs, barristers for us, local authority, that effectively they can use your own money against you. Like the FCA, it was a similar situation. That they can use your own money against you. And that's what, also with the notice with the FCA, effectively, in terms of the victims. Effectively, the victims of financial scandals fund the FCA, because the FCA don't have any money either, like the local authority. So they're funded by a levy on businesses. They pay it out of their revenue, and their revenue comes from clients. So effectively, clients fund the FCA, and they were using this funding to elevate their own reputation above the victims of the scandal, effectively. So you see this a lot now. These authorities that believe they're beyond any accountability, that they're infallible. If you spot out the shortcomings, they'll accuse you of aggression. They'll accuse you of being somehow delusional when you unpack this distortion of narratives. And Labour did the same, using your own money against you. And that's the same that what we had here is they were using their own money against us. And statements went in, back to the case, and one thing that came out quickly about this hearing was the first hearing, the local authority, and you could see the judge was bending to them straight away on this. Is these, they called them jotters, you could call them journals or diaries of elder daughter, and the comments in there that she'd make in her interest in the boy, one of the disclosures, who again I feel was treated very, very badly, and the girl as well, manipulated by older daughter, and I'll come into that um, uh, in some of the evidence they put forward, and also these comments that she had made about, younger daughter, so her sister, really nasty comments, and saying that she will end up alone. And they wanted those out of the equation very, very quickly. So we were in essence ordered to. We took copies, of course, and the judge knew that, and she said it very waspishly that we would do this. They wanted us to submit them to her so she could then look at them and say they were inadmissible, but they were crucial. There's a reason why they were trying to cultivate this narrative of a protective sister because they wanted the package cash flows. Yeah, they had to stay together, the protected sister. We knew it's nonsense. We knew that we described, I described our daughter, again, I'm not saying this, I'm saying it as I see it, not say you're being embittered, but very, very transient. And she always has been, I'm afraid. Uh, and, we were proven right because in the foster placement, this protective sister bolted and left her younger sister, our younger daughter, at the first opportunity. Yeah, the school that was supposedly her, she loved her school, loved the school, bolted from it, gave it up in early sixth form. Yeah, friends changing a lot, falling out with people. Again, when she called me in February to come back from my work, she was in some argument with some girls. So all these things that we were saying, look, there's major issues here, and her motivations, and we've since, my wife and I had conversations with her, as I said, whenever she's the contacts come from her to me. There was a time I bumped into her somewhere, but other than that, it's come from her. And she said to both my wife, I will do everything to keep you apart. I will do everything, and I'll watch you tear yourselves apart. There are major issues where they are never ever taken up. Lastly, I'll finish on Ukraine and my own position. Watch Ukraine. It's the next massive scandal that they're going to have to try to manage very, very carefully. There's a situation here where we've got, certainly here in Britain, we're being taxed at the highest level. I think on record now, when you take into all the double taxations. So you've got a situation where huge amounts of money poured into Ukraine in a war that, as I've explained to you, and even as far as the book in 2024, they can never win. They were up against, and I don't condone the invasion, by the way, I'm just giving you the reality of it. They were up against Ukraine, up against a belligerent that's got far more resources, both in manpower and elsewhere. When I said to you in the book, Lost to Races, when all this narrative, victory to Ukraine, it wasn't going to happen. You would need to put NATO troops in, and then, not even then, would guarantee. But they were, Europe and UK were all this thing. So, we've now got a situation where money was poured in a war that Ukraine could never win, promises that could never be kept, on the vain hope that the United States, so the UK and Europe, the vain hope the United States would continue pouring money in, and they would somehow create this situation where the Russians were forced back, Putin would be humiliated, and there would be some regime change in Russia. That was always the proxy war of it. But sadly, the reality is it's huge amounts of waste in human life and financial resources. And on the financial resources, you can see it all around Zelensky now. Corruption, people resigning, people going off. So not only has the money been wasted, it's either been blown up or stolen, the money. And you can see the UK and France and Germany and the EU trying to peddle very hard of how they can sell this defeat uh, to the public whilst they're taxing them so very, very high. And this is probably some of the reasons bringing these things up with that's led to this police state terror I've had as well. Maybe we'll see in time, I guess. Um, and Ukraine is going to end up in a worse position than it would have done had those talks that were scuppered by UK and Europeans that the Turks were heading up in 2022 to lead this to the war to an end, a peaceful solution. Ukraine are going to end up in a worse position with billions of pounds either blown up and stolen and huge number of lives lost. Remember in the videos on my other channel, when I've been in Poland, in Europe this year, seeing huge numbers of fighting age Ukrainians in Europe, particularly Poland, and nobody has ever been allowed to ask Lindsay the question, why are there so many fighting age Ukrainians abroad when you're fighting this war? The simple reason is they could see the realities of it. That doesn't mean those that stay behind are not brave. They're incredibly brave, and I hope they're recognised as such. Where this conflict is turned, this proxy war is fallen to bits, is Trump uh, understands the realities of this war and has come in uh, and said it's unsustainable, unwinnable, unless we go toe to toe with the Russians, we're not willing to do, and said there's no more money. Effectively, that's unravelled this shambolic strategy from the UK and Europe. And they're trying to pedal very, very quickly to try to say, how can we sell a failure to the public when we're taxing them up to the hilt? So that's the reality of it, I'm afraid. In terms of my own health, I'm continuing to work with the crisis team. I want to get to a position where I feel better and I can hopefully get back to normality. There are some issues. Even my wife she sees a high vis jacket now. She's, very, very unnerved after the, uh, the trauma they put her through on the basis of using a pretext of spray painting a car. That apparently happened 9 and 10 months prior to them entering this property. They used it to take devices and search for 2 hours. And in my interview, one of the questions was framed that we received a response from the family court, and I lost my temper and spray painted the car, even though it was 2 months after the second spray painted incident on the car. So the premise is that I would need a time machine to have done it. They still keep my devices. They know some of them aren't owned by me. It's a form of psychological abuse. I think I've covered that very extensively. Allegedly today I'll receive a call from a Sergeant Brooke who will provide some guidance. Let's see whether that happens. It seems that Lloyd has been shuffled off somewhere else. But that's it for now. Take care. Next, I will take you through further the case management hearings and how they try to build this faux narrative. Take care. Bye.